LiAngelo Ball could be in some serious trouble. If standard practices are applied, Ball and the two other UCLA basketball players arrested Tuesday in China under suspicion of shoplifting face between 3 and 10 years in prison if convicted, according to Chinese lawyers who briefed Yahoo Sports. Will, I'll start with you. How big of a deal is this for the Ball family?
Well, I think as you just laid out, when it comes to the potential punishment for LiAngelo and the other UCLA players, it's a big deal. I mean, we spend a lot of time talking about, guys, concepts like due process and the fair application of laws when it comes to the NFL, CBA, or even the United States of America. But let me just explain to you something. These are uniquely American ideas. Yeah, there's some other countries out there in the world that put value on the ideas like due process, but let me be clear. China's not one of them. So when the potential punishment, if convicted, is 3 to 10 years, you have no protection. You have very little protection on how rigorous the process will be to avoiding that punishment or proving your innocence or getting towards some semblance of a concept of justice. This is the kind of country where people are lost in jail systems for very little, for very long periods of time. So this could be a very big deal when it comes to how it affects LiAngelo. And by the way, that's setting aside whether or not he even gets to remain on the UCLA team, remain a student at UCLA. I do want to say this, though. While we've had these conversations and I've said, I think LeVar has taught some bad lessons. For example, pulling his teams off the court when he doesn't like the calls of the referee, suggesting to young people under his guidance that rules don't apply to you. I'm not going to sit here today and tell you this is an example of that or this is an illustration of that. When it comes to LiAngelo's character, young people in this country and in every country do stupid stuff all the time. Make no mistake, this is incredibly stupid. But it happens all the time with 18, 19-year-olds, and it seems to happen often when we travel and think the rules don't apply to us. I don't indict LiAngelo's character in any way, and I don't indict LeVar because of this. But I will tell you, there's going to be a hard lesson here, and it's going to come from China, not from UCLA or from the parents.
Let me just say that China has some economic freedom. It's somewhat economically free. It is not a politically free country, and people should take into consideration that when everyone talks, especially basketball players, are going to exploit the Chinese market, understand you're not in a free place. We can't. I'm not going to go into the Chinese government right now, but you ain't in America over there. That's number one. Number two is I don't know that there's proof that LiAngelo did this. Why? Because the Chinese government thinks he did it, or some local branch of the Chinese government thinks he did it. That's enough for people. I don't know that he did it. Will, I think you did a good job pointing out there's no due process there, the way we conceive of it in America, a far superior political system. But finally, let me just say about the big baller brand. This is bad for the big baller brand because we're now talking in the media about shoplifting. And shoplifting is a petty crime. It's one of the reasons it's absurd that he'd be facing up to 10 years in prison for a petty crime. Young people do stupid things all the time. Right. And that's one of the things that some young people do. And it's a bad thing, but it ain't, 10 years in prison is certainly not proportional. Again, you're talking about China, not the United States. But the big baller brand, petty crime, it's petty. It's not big baller. That is not on brand, and it's a bad look.
Well, it's a bad look. There's no denying that. And I agree with you, Will, in terms of this ain't America we're talking about. This is China. They live by a different set of laws, and they don't play. And it could be a very, very rough ride for LiAngelo. There's no doubt about that. But I'm not going to ignore LeVar Ball in all of this. I certainly am one of those people that have been on the record religiously pointing out how kids make mistakes all the time. They do stupid things all the time. And if they're old enough to know better, then I don't blame the parents. And I'm certainly not blaming LeVar Ball here. And on many, many occasions, I've been on the record coming to his defense as a father because I think people have used his obnoxious ways and rhetoric about the sport of basketball as it pertains to his son to attack this man. And I think that it's been a bit excessive. The flip side to that occurred today, based on the video we saw with him, pushing. I think that was his wife in the wheelchair out of the hospital. Here's the thing: he doesn't need to be coming out of his mouth saying it's not a big deal. It's a very, very big deal because this isn't America. This is China that we're talking about here. And you don't know or what kind of ramifications may come down against your son. And so when you look at it from that perspective, it's going to give people and incite people to come at him in different ways. You've been focusing on Lonzo. You've been spewing your rhetoric about the big baller brand. What haven't you been doing? I don't think it's fair. But it's no doubt in my mind that people are going to use this as an opportunity to come at him from that level, from that vantage point. And they're going to be talking about him as a man, and they're going to be talking about him as a father, and they're going to use this latest incident with his son to do just that, particularly if China tries to bring a heavy hammer down upon his son. And those are the kind of things that, some people may have said he should have been preoccupied with and worried about before this incident occurred. And now they have the ammunition to do that, and there's not much he's going to be able to say. I'm sure he'll come up with something, but there's not going to be much that he can say to diffuse that, because that's reality.
But and by the way, when we talk about traveling abroad to places like China, communist government, there's much less transparency. And how do you know that LiAngelo Ball did anything? We don't know. Because, again, you're taking, so you don't necessarily, if you go to a place like that with some economic freedom, but not the political freedom to match,
Max.
You don't necessarily have to do anything to wind up in big trouble.
No opinion here, just details. Mm-hmm. The authorities in China, according to the reports, went to the hotel where the teams were staying, and they questioned members of both teams, and people didn't know what was going on, and they denied coaches access to the players while they were being interrogated by the authorities. And based off of all of that, all of a sudden you saw these players, these specific players, arrested. So that means they didn't know who it was. They investigated the matter and discovered who exactly it was. So that's what makes it even more serious.